be respectful of everybody's time. Hope everyone had a great holiday weekend. Got some time to spend with family. Hopefully a little bit of downtime. It was, we're still pretty mild up here, so but hope everybody had a great one. First off, I want to thank Brandon Stooksbury for helping us out today. So those of you that I'm sure you're all jumping on, you probably know of or know Brandon. I had the pleasure of working with Brandon when we worked on the Teaching Summit committee for the last National Teaching Summit. Thought he was great then, and I kind of leaned on our little relationship to get him to help us out today. For those of you who don't know Brandon, he is an Amazon best-selling author. He has 2 books out there, the Wedge book and the Putter book, that are both fantastic. I've read both. He's built himself an amazing coaching platform. He is currently down at, I believe, is it Metairie? Brandon, am I pronouncing it the right way? Metairie, sorry. Metairie Country Club down in Louisiana in the Gulf States. He spent some time in Georgia. He was part of the leadership group in Georgia until Scott Geary chased him away, and then he had to leave. But really appreciate Brandon coming on. What I'm going to do before Brandon takes over with some thoughts, I'm going to pass it over to Matt for some technical information. I know we do this each call, but there are some new folks that seem to jump on each call. So Matt, why don't you take it from here?
Sure. Just a couple real quick things. This is a discussion today, so you will be toggling yourself off mute, but while you're not speaking, if you can keep your microphone muted so there isn't any background noise, that would be great. Video is completely optional, but it is nice to put a face with the voice when speaking. There's a button I'd like you all to avoid hitting. It's a rectangle with an up arrow that says share screen. Do not click that, as that will interrupt the discussions. If you have questions or comments, you can use the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen, put a question in chat, or just go ahead and unmute yourself as well. If you have any technical issues, put those into the chat feature and I'll do my best to help you through those. Just be aware that most of the time those issues stem from your own Wi-Fi connections. If anyone has dialed in via telephone today, please send me an email at mfrey@pgahq.com so we can get your PDR credits for today. And then finally, we are recording the session. So if you ever want to refer back to it or share it with a colleague, it will be up on our YouTube channel after this meeting. With that, I'll pass it back over to Jeff and Brandon.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Again, Brandon, the floor is yours. We talked a little bit. We had this is our 3rd Coaches Corner conversation that we started, and we did ask for some feedback from the group on the last 2 calls. And one of the things that really jumped out was some short game conversations. So obviously your name jumped right to the top of the list, and that's one of the main reasons I reached out to you. So I'll toss it over to you with the idea. We'll talk through some short game, but obviously open it up or leave it open for folks to question and comment along the way. So thanks again for taking the time. I know it's a little bit earlier down there in Louisiana, so appreciate you answering the bell for us this morning, buddy.
Yeah, look, thanks for the kind words and certainly the opportunity. I see lots of names on the list today that I know, and Andy Miller on stage with me at the summit down there. I hope you had as much fun as I did. John Dunnigan, you're in there somewhere. Hey, buddy, lots of great names and folks that I know and I've heard of, and so I appreciate you guys being involved. I will say, Jeffrey, I'm as a member of the education committee down here in the Gulf States. You and I got to talk off camera here about this little thing you got going. This is incredible. And we've had some discussions about doing this very thing, and it sounds like and looks like you've got it going on. So we'll have to have that conversation. But thanks for the opportunity to be here. I do want to stress I have some things prepared, but I think this works much better if you guys talk, hopefully more than I talk. And so I do want questions. Please don't hesitate to interrupt me if mid-thought, if I say something or you hear something that you want to ask. I want this to be a discussion. I didn't start out to be the short game guy or known as a short game guy. I was very fortunate in writing a book that was just supposed to be a project, for me in my career and a way to make a little bit money on the side, and it turned out to be an Amazon bestseller, and it went there and went to number one. The first 2 weeks it was published and stayed at number one for over 5 years. I'll never forget. I'll tell you the quick story. I was sitting on the couch, and a buddy of mine with Golf Digest, Matt Rudy, helped me write the book, and I'm on the couch with my wife just watching TV one evening, and I get a text from Matt that says, "Are you watching the ratings?" I didn't have any idea what he was talking about. And I said, "No, don't know what you mean." And he sends me a link, and it's to the Amazon page on the rating. And my book is sitting at number 3. Harvey Penick is number 2, and Ben Hogan's book is number 1. And so now I'm interested, right? And so I'm hitting refresh every few minutes, and when it goes, I watch it go from 3 to 2 and take down Harvey Penick. And I kind of give a little fist pump, and my wife looks over at me and she's like, "What's the matter with you?" I said, "Don't worry about it. You wouldn't understand." And so now, refresh. And about 10 minutes later, it takes down Ben Hogan. And at this point I get up and I act like an idiot. And she said, what has happened? And I try to explain the enormity of what just happened, and she just didn't get it. But I got really lucky. It was a cool project, and it did really well. And the point is, it sort of solidified me out there as a short game guy. And while I do enjoy teaching short game more than anything else, it's certainly not the only thing I teach. But I don't mind, kind of being known as a short game guy, and it's a passion of mine. And I found an opportunity and a hole, if you will, in our profession that I thought needed to be filled. And it's been a fun journey. And so with that, I want to talk about a few things that I think a lot of people stumble down the wrong path, and then not knowing what they're doing or not doing, they sort of stay on that path. And so just to give you a little bit of journey about how this started, I was working for the PGA Tour Academy in Las Vegas, and we would do golf schools. And so these folks would come in from out of town, and they would spend 3 days, 4 days. It's kind of a dying model now, but 10, 15 years ago, it was blowing and going, especially in a town like Vegas. And so we had a little bit of freedom on what we talked about. And I would notice that in this very intensive 3 or 4 day process, as a coach, I think and hope we all know that that's probably not the best learning environment to try to teach people skills. But I did notice that they usually showed the most improvement after our short game sessions. And so it really kind of got me thinking, why were they seeing more improvement here versus something in full swing? And, it didn't take me long to realize that the reason for that is because the motions are smaller. They don't require quite as much talent, if you will, or gross motor skill control as, hitting a driver or hitting an iron. And so it made me want to focus more as a coach on short game, because I felt like I had an opportunity to get these people better. So I started doing some research. I started studying, I started watching YouTube, I started going to seminars, and I started to try to find as much information as I could. And the more I looked, the more I realized there wasn't a whole lot out there. Remember, this was, 10, 12 years ago. And so there were a few people that were doing some talking. Dave Pelz had his books. There were 2 or 3 or 4 guys that were out there talking. Seekman had just sort of started to come on, on the scene. James Ridyard, nobody even knew his name yet at the moment. Stan Utley had a book out, but there wasn't a whole lot out there. I'm not traditionally a very good golfer, as score would suggest, but short game has always been something I've been very good at, and I've always felt like my short game was very different. The way I was taught by my mentor stood out to me as being different from what I was hearing when I started doing research. And it didn't take me long to understand that I think what was going on is that in the absence of having any information, coaches would avoid short game, not everyone, but as a whole, until you reach the very end of the lesson when the student would say, "Hey, I'm also, kind of chunking my chip shots. Can we look at this?" And a coach would go and spend the last 5 to 10 minutes, of a full swing lesson over on the short game green, and they would teach what they were taught, which I think had probably been handed down from the guy that taught them, and everything was ball back, lean forward, hit down on it, deliver a lot of forward shaft lean. And look, I'm not here to tell you that won't work. There are plenty of guys out there that make a lot of money for a living doing it that way. But that was odd to me because it was different from the way I was taught. And so it got me thinking, and I wanted to I wanted to learn more. And when I couldn't get what I wanted, I thought, well, maybe here's an opportunity to put some information out. And so that's where the book came from and sort of where my short game journey started. And so I'll tell you a little bit about the problems I wanted to solve that I don't think people do. When you coach short game full time, you start to understand that people don't approach the short game the same way they do the full swing. And here's what I mean. Most people have a plan when they approach a full swing shot. Even a 25 handicap, who we would consider probably the least skillful, on the spectrum, if you will, even they have a plan. They walk up to a ball, and if it's in the rough or if it's in the fairway, they might make a decision based on that. The very least, they pull out a rangefinder and they figure out how far the yardage is, and then that helps them select the club. And then hopefully they're doing a little bit of having a little bit of concern over where they're going to aim. All those things are making a plan for the shot. People don't tend to do that in short game. People tend to get out of the golf cart with their highest lofted wedge and their putter, and they walk up, and when they get to their ball, they take that club and they just try to hit it and make it land somewhere near the flag. And that pretty much summarized every student that I taught. That's a problem. You have multiple wedges in your bag. They produce multiple trajectories, even with the exact same motion. And if you approach short game similar to how you approach full swing, then you have an opportunity to hit some different shots. And here's what I mean. And I tell people this in my lessons all the time. If you have an 8-iron, or if you're 150 yards from the hole and you pull a 7-iron in the fairway, and that's how far your 7-iron goes, and you hit it up there and you hit the green somewhere and you two-putt and you make a par, and then you come to the next hole and you're 130 yards from the green, you just hit an 8-iron softer, right? Or a 7-iron softer. And they all look at me and they go, no, I pull my 9-iron. Okay. That's how the game's designed. That's how the tools are built. We can make the exact same golf swing and get a different result from one club to the other. And that makes the game really easy in comparison to us standing out there with one golf club and trying to produce 14 different motions to get 14 different shots. The game would be really hard if we had to do that. So why don't we approach short game the same way? Here's what I mean. You walk up to a shot and you think for a minute about what kind of shot you might want to hit. Do I want it to be low? Do I want it to be high? Do I want it to be medium? Which golf club in my bag of my wedges, my sand wedge, my lob wedge, my gap wedge, whatever you end up having, or whatever you end up having access to, might give me a better opportunity to hit that shot. Now, please understand, at the highest levels, those guys tend to use one wedge more often than not. But we're also talking about the most talented people in the world with a golf club in their hand. Their situation and their conditions are also very different than what most of our amateurs face on a daily basis. Their greens are firmer, their greens are faster on average, and so they tend to use one wedge a lot. I just don't teach it that way. And people can disagree with that if they want, but I think the wedges should be tools in a tool chest. If a carpenter walked up to a home and the only tool he had was a hammer, he could build the home, but it would take him a long time and it'd be really hard and it'd probably be a little messy when he was finished. If he's got multiple tools in his tool belt, then he's going to have a lot better chance at building that home quicker, easier, more efficiently, and the finished product will look better. I want people to look at wedges the same way. And so why would you stand and with a lob wedge and try to manipulate your body or the club or your hands to try to hit it low when you could just do the exact same motion you were trying to do before with a gap wedge? Ball comes out lower. It reduces variables, in my opinion, that people have to try to think about and hit good shots with. And so the first mistake I saw was there was no plan. And I tried to encourage people to think about a plan. That plan starts with where you want the ball to land. And in the book, I go through some reasons why, that you are to try to land it as close to the edge of the green between you and the flag as you can. We can or don't have to get into that, but if it starts with a plan, the first start of the plan is where you're going to land it. Based on where you're going to land it, how far is it going to roll? Once you determine how far it's going to roll, then that helps you back yourself into a trajectory. And once you know what kind of trajectory you need to hit, then you get to pick a club. And once you're done with all that, really the only variable now is how big does the swing get to make the ball land at the landing zone. And that pretty much sums up how I teach wedges inside 40 yards. Outside 40 yards, they're a little bit different. We start to put enough speed on the club to where we can put enough spin on the ball to get the ball to stop a lot faster. And trajectory tends to matter a little bit less when it comes to stopping the ball on the green. And so things get a little bit different outside 40 yards, but inside 40 yards, my buddy James Seekman would call it finesse wedges. That's how I tend to teach it from the best player you'll teach right up to a 30 handicap. I want them to go through that approach, and I make them say that out loud and talk through that in a short game lesson so that they get used to understanding how that process works. And I find that when they do that, then they can take the technique that they currently have and end up dropping a few shots off of that just because they're picking the right club. And so that was kind of where I got started. I'm happy to answer any questions or address any thoughts anybody's got on that before we move on. Just kind of speak up. Jeffrey, you raise your hand. What you got?
Yeah, what's your thought? There's been a lot of talk around Victor Hovland's improvement in his short game, and it looks like the process they go through is actually moving the circle a little bit forward during his chip swing. What's your thoughts on some of that?
Yeah, so that gets into some pretty advanced stuff, and I know Joe Mayo, and I've listened and watched him teach for a very long time, and what he's teaching to those of us who have been sort of immersed in that side of it is not all that odd. Joe, I love him to death, and he is a master at creating intrigue and question and controversy around what he's doing, and he's doing his best job at it right now. And so look, I think you get into some of those topics and some of the geometry and some of the collision physics of the golf ball that you track on very expensive launch monitors with very expensive and accurate equipment, and you can start to do some things different to a golf ball that guys at that level can take advantage of. Those are things that I would never teach at my club. I just wouldn't do it. Number one, I don't have all the equipment necessary to really be able to measure that and really be able to provide the diagnostic feedback that I think would be necessary to really teach someone how to do that. Number two, I don't think it's necessary at the club level. What they're doing is very challenging. They're really manipulating and messing with kind of launch angle and friction on the between the face and the ball to produce a certain land angle and a certain spin rate that if you can do it is incredibly effective, as we've all seen with Hovland. But the talent and the skill required to do that are so high that I just don't think that's something that I would ever try to bring to the club level. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's some pretty interesting stuff. I just don't know how much use it has, at the level that I teach at. I don't know about you guys. Nick, I'm not even going to try your last name, but feel free.
It's Iacono, but you're good. No worries. I appreciate you. So, studying a lot about short game within the last, 5-6 years, getting really intrigued, the nitty gritty stuff of it. You have a guy like, Joe Mayo, who's really talking about controlling low point, moving it forward. Now I'm in the school. I'm kind of more on the Redyard side. I really like the depth control, controlling the low point, and then from there you can use that idea and vary, certain aspects of it to get different launch windows and different spin and friction rate, all that kind of stuff. So, are you more like, because I'm not, naive enough. I'm not really familiar with too much of your stuff. Are you more about the depth control, or are you more about the low point? You talked about shaft lean, and that kind of always intrigues people when you talk about shaft lean and short game. So kind of where do you stand on either or a combination of one of the two or whatever it is?
Yeah, I mean, I think our nature as coaches, is to try to put people into categories, right? Oh, you teach with the bounce, you teach with forward lean, you teach stack and tilt, you teach, body motion. I think our nature is to try to put people into categories, and I don't know that I would want anyone to do that to the way I coach, because I really do believe that everyone can learn and can use aspects of different styles depending on the skill set they bring to the tee. And what I mean by that is, some people might benefit from moving, a thought or a feel to move the low point a lot more forward and hit down on it a lot steeper. Some people might benefit from a thought of moving the low point a little closer to the ball and being a little more shallow. And so I try not to let myself get put into one of those boxes. However, if you're asking me what I teach more of, it would definitely be a shallower style where the low point is probably a little bit closer to the ball than what you are hearing Joe and Victor work on. That doesn't mean to say that I don't teach people to hit down on it. I just believe that style for someone who doesn't have an extremely high level of talent is a little bit more forgiving, particularly when you mix the right wedge fit with it, which is a whole nother world that we can get into if you'd like to talk about. But if I had to pick one side or the other, I would tell you I probably lean more toward a what I would call a shallower style with a low point that's a little closer to the ball than what you might see Victor and Joe working on.
Thank you. I appreciate it, because, a lot of people have different ideas how they control their swing circle. So I was just kind of curious to see where your mindset is in controlling that circle, closer low point, shallower, steeper, whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, look, at the real answer to that is at the highest level of short game, you manipulate it with every single shot, right? I mean, you at will, if you will, like you manipulate the low point and the angle of attack at your discretion, depending on the shot you want to hit, and that's one thing that I think I would want everybody to take away from that conversation about, Joe and Victor versus James Ridyard versus Brandon, whatever. Those guys are doing all kinds of things. They're moving it all over the place, every single shot they hit. And if I would tell you to not let yourself have the idea that the only thing Joe Mayo or James Ridyard is teaching is the low point has to be here or it has to be here. Those guys are moving it all over the place all the time. And depending on how you move your body and chest in the motion, depends on where that low point is going to be and how you have to manipulate your hands to manage that motion. Look, it's just like full swing. It's all about patterns, right? And depending on how you move your body and your hands, and your pattern's going to be one way versus the other, and your mistakes tend to be on one side of that coin or the other. It's all about patterns and matching up motions. Andy.
Going on, man?
How you doing, buddy?
Good. So real generic, like, what is the most common swing fault that you see on a daily basis from like just an average bad golfer? And then what is the most common fix that you would employ?
Yeah, that's actually really easy. And when I tell you most common, I would tell you it's 90+% of every golf lesson I give when it comes to finesse wedges. Virtually no one moves weight, I'm going to say mass, right, toward the target. They just don't do it. Some people set it up forward and keep it forward, and that can work. But most people, because the motion is, like, a lot of people struggle with it in the full swing anyway, but certainly in the short game when the motion is so small and we don't have a ton of turn and we don't have a ton of, drive, without question, that's the biggest challenge I see. And I work on it in just about every lesson I teach. I start to answer the second part of that is the fix. I start by trying, and I think Robert raised his hand. Robert, I'm coming to you. I start by explaining other sports. And I've gotten it down as simple to asking someone to throw a ball underhanded, right? No one, and I repeat, no one with half an ounce of athletic ability in them at all will ever fall away from the target when they're trying to throw a ball underhanded toward it. They just don't do it, right? It's an unnatural motion. And so I've gone as far sometimes as videoing people throwing a ball underhanded to show what I call energy flowing toward the target. That's just the way I talk about it, right? Because if I talk about a shift, that tends to come out of the knees and the legs, and that causes some problems in short game. And so I don't tend to use that terminology. But in reality, it is the mass, or your center of gravity moving toward the target in the short game. The best in the world typically have a little bit of drift. You really see it in Hovland, right? But they have some drift toward the target, which is very unique in terms of a golf motion, because they certainly don't do that in their full swing. And so I start by talking about other sports, whether it's, hitting a tennis ball or hitting a baseball or even throwing a ball underhanded, to get them the idea of moving their chest toward the target. And then there are multiple drills that, you can do, from a step drill to a flamingo drill, where you make them balance on their lead leg and feel what it's like to rotate around that lead leg instead of kind of hanging back on their right foot. And so there's lots of different ways you can teach that that aren't too dissimilar from some things that we do in the full swing, but by far that's the biggest problem. Okay, I think Matt, was it Crawford or Robert Crawford maybe? Is that right? Raise your hand first. Let's go there, and then Matt Goody will come to you.
Yep, Bob Crowther, good morning. Thanks for taking your time. So I just went to a seminar with Utley, Stan Utley, and what do you think about him with the hips going up at the end?
Yeah, so here's what I would say about Utley. And Stan's a wonderful coach. He obviously is very good at what he does. Stan is a little bit unique in that he has a style that is very far down the spectrum one way. And Stan teaches people to do that. And that's neither good nor bad. It just is what it is. And you have to understand that when you start working with Stan and you start listening to some of the things that Stan says. And that style 100% can work. Make no mistake. But I think Stan teaches what he feels, right? And a lot of players tend to do that. Phil Mickelson is a great example of that. If you've listened to Phil Mickelson's short game stuff, which for the average amateur, and if Phil were on this video, I would say it in front of him, usually is a disaster, right? Just the style that he uses requires a certain skill level and some manipulation that most people can't wrap their head around. But Phil teaches exactly what he feels and exactly what he does. Stan Utley's the same way, right? And so just like I talked about earlier with, people needing different parts of different people, there are some people that will benefit greatly from some of the feels that Stan has, and some of the feels that Stan teaches. Now, to your question about the hips rising, the reason he teaches that, or I would presume, I'm not in his head, but at some point you have to shallow the golf club. No matter how hard you're hitting down on it or how steep the angle of attack is, at some point the golf club's got to work its way up, right? And that's the feel, I would guess, that Stan uses or has in order to shallow the club, is a rising of the hips. And so imagine what that does as the hips rise. As the left hip rises, the left shoulder rises. As the left shoulder rises, it pulls the arm up. As the arm pulls up, the hand pulls up, shaft pulls up, club shallows. And so I'm not in Stan's head. I don't know why he says that, but if I had to guess, that would be why he's doing that. And that's exactly what he feels to get the club, quote unquote, out of the ground. And that can absolutely be a very good feel for those folks that tend to, this probably won't come through, but tend to kind of drive the club into the ground a little too long, and a little too much. That's a great feel for those folks to get it out of the ground.
Thanks.
Matt Goody, I think, is next. Is that right?
There we go. Yeah, Matt Gowdy, but close enough.
Gowdy, sorry. Yeah, I'm just going to stop trying. Just Matt.
All right. So my question for you, when you were talking about Hovland and not having all of the technology, we'll say, to measure everything, what technology are you using on a regular basis when working short game? Maybe both inside 40 yards and then also outside 40 yards. Just curious to hear your thoughts on some of that.
Yeah, so that depends on the student, right? I have access to all of it. I rarely use all of it. It's my style. I'm not saying that's the right way or the best way or the only way. I don't tend to use a launch monitor for most of my students talking about finesse wedges. I typically will use a video camera and some training aids more than anything else, because their problems, while I could show them on a launch monitor, it's a little bit more challenging to move and carry a launch monitor around to hit different short game shots on a short game area. I do the bulk of my short game teaching outside on a green as opposed to in a bay. And so the technology is a little bit more cumbersome to move around and carry with me. That's part of why I don't use it. The other reason why I don't use it is because the student isn't going to have access to using that technology when they're practicing. So I want to make sure that I speak to them and give them drills in ways that they can use on their own when they're not with me. Now, that being said, depending on the issue that we're talking about, or the golf IQ of the student, or their practice habits, or what the technology they might have access to, meaning, several of my guys have launch monitors in their own basement, right? And they do more of their practice there than they do out on the green. I don't know that that's the best way to do it, but that's what they do. Those guys I will tend to use a launch monitor a little bit more with, and I'm sharing the same information. I'm just talking about it in a different way and giving them different quantifiable variables to measure it than I might be doing when I'm using a video camera or a training aid. And so it really depends on the student. I am in the process of building a brand new learning center right now at my club, and I'm going, for the first time in my career, I'm going to have a force plate. And I am very interested to kind of dig in a little bit more on how I can teach what I was talking about with Nick earlier, or sorry, Andy, about the chest moving and mass moving. I think there really could be some cool, very quick and easy ways to show that to students when I have access to that technology. I haven't in my career.
Yeah, that's actually what I was asking, or kind of this reason for my question. I use a pressure mat a lot. I've incorporated it with short game a ton, even all the way up through putting, and it's pretty cool to see. I was just curious what your thoughts were there, but I'll be even more curious to see what your thoughts are down the road.
Yeah, I don't have a ton of thoughts right now, to be honest with you. I mean, I have plenty of thoughts in what I think I'm going to see and what I think I'm going to be able to teach once I have access to it. But until I do, and I can put some of my students on it, and I can see if their movement produces the result I think it's going to produce in terms of what I see on the force plate, then I'm not sure I'm ready to answer that question yet. So Jeffrey, you'll have to have me back on at some point in the future, and maybe Matt and I can have that conversation. Was there another question in there that I missed?
I think that was it, everybody right now, bud.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about wedge fitting, if that's all right with anybody. And we can certainly go back to anything if you guys think of a question. I'm going to tell you a quick little story. I am a Titleist staff member and have been for several years now. And I was invited to watch Bob Vokey give a little presentation very early in my career. And for those of you who don't know Vokey, he's kind of a short guy with a squeaky New Englandy accent, and he's kind of interesting to listen to. And I was sitting there, and I'm just getting started. I was in the process of writing my wedge book, and I had lots of thoughts, but I hadn't heard a lot on wedge fitting. There's still not a lot on wedge fitting out there, for the record. But he's talking about fitting wedges, and he's talking about fitting grinds, and Vokey, sort of looks at wedge fitting in the world of the shape of the sole, or from that sort of worldview, if you will. And I kind of raised my hand in the back of the room. And, here I am, kind of a young professional at the time, surrounded by a lot of guys that weren't young, in the room. And I said, Mr. Vokey, I said, you talk a lot about wedge fitting and this guy needing this shape of sole, or this guy needing this grind or this bounce or whatever. I said, but how do you know? Like what about the fitting process tells you that this guy needs this type of sole shape, or that guy needs that type of sole shape? And he kind of looks up at the ceiling for a minute, and he said, Brandon, it just sounds different. Next question. And here I sit, and I'm like, what does that mean? Right? It just sounds different. But after years of coaching, it really does have a unique sound, right? It's sort of the sound, the way I would describe it It's the sound of the sole thumping or slapping the ground and the ball clicking on the face in a very unique interval. And it really does just have a different sound when the wedge is fit correctly. And so let's dig in and talk about that a little bit, because that experience with Vokey sort of started me down that road. He's right, or I should say I agree with him, that the shape of the sole is exponentially more important than the number of the bounce imprinted on the sole. I would caution everyone about looking at bounce numbers and trying to fit off bounce numbers. And here's why: because they are all over the map in how they are measured. Vokey, for example, does not measure bounce. It's what he calls dynamic bounce. He thinks that, or believes, and accurately so, if the face is delivered from a square position, then hypothetically the M grind on his wedge will deliver one amount of bounce from an open face. You open the face, it will deliver a different amount of bounce. If you play it up on the toe, it will deliver a third amount of bounce. And so he would explain it to you. Why would I stamp one number on the bottom when there could be multiple numbers depending on how the wedge is used? And so he uses what he calls dynamic bounce, which pretty much just means he guesses and stamps a number on the bottom of it. I mean, he'll tell you that if you get him off to himself. Guess is probably a bad word, but I mean, it's not measured at all, is my point. Cleveland, to my knowledge, used to measure and stamp the exact number on the bottom of the wedge. I don't know that they do that anymore. Callaway does not measure. I'm not entirely sure about Ping. I don't even think they stamp numbers on the bottom of their wedges, but there are lots of different ways to get to a number. And so I would caution you away from fitting by bounce. Oh, this is a 12-degree bounce, and so it has more bounce, and this is better for you because you're a digger. Or this is 6 degrees of bounce, and this is better for you because you're a sweeper. And those, look, I took those right from Titleist, and I understand why they do what they do. And I've had conversations with their marketing team, who I'm very good friends with, and they're trying to find ways, as are other companies in the business, to make it easier for rank and file professionals to be able to fit wedges. And so they try to fit people into these little columns. Are you a sweeper? Are you a digger? And then that means you need this or you need that. The conditions you play out of, are they soft? Are they firm? And that will lean you one way or the other. Here's the cold, hard reality. Your style of delivering the wedge will dictate what sole shape works the best. I want to say that again. Your style of delivery, meaning how you deliver the shaft and how you deliver the face in your short game, will dictate the shape of sole that you need, and therefore the bounce that works best for you. Now, as I mentioned earlier, low points and shaft deliveries are all over the map. And even in the best, players in the world are manipulating those things all over the place in every single swing. So it gets a little challenging and a little complicated. But at the club level, meaning at the average golf level, where most of us, I dare say, teach, maybe not all of us, but most of us butter our bread, so to speak, those folks tend to deliver the wedge one way. And you have two choices when it comes to fitting, right? And this, by the way, can be expanded into all fitting, right? But we're going to stay on wedge fitting. You can either fit a wedge to the way they swing, or you can use a wedge to influence the way they swing. Here's what I mean. If you have someone that delivers a lot of forward lean, okay, that's just the style that they use. Their golf balls tend to come out lower. They tend to kind of skid a lot when they hit shots, or when they hit the green, and they struggle to be short-sided and hit it really high and soft. They struggle with that because of the way they deliver the wedge. When you deliver that much forward lean, then it's really challenging to hit it high and soft. Not impossible, but challenging. So I want you to think about, I wish I had a golf club. I want you to think about the sole of the club. and what happens to the sole as you lean the handle forward and the impact that has on the bounce of the sole, right? So the more you lean the handle forward, the more the leading edge wants to turn into a little shovel. And ergo, the more back edge you need on the club to keep the sole flat to the ground. Without a club and using my hands, I'm not sure that makes sense to everybody, but hopefully you kind of, I said that in a way that makes sense to everybody. So if you put a wedge in that person's hand that fits that motion, forward lean means a lot of bounce, right? Or I should say a sole that has a lot of trailing edge on it, then you will forever keep that person in that delivery profile, because you have put a tool in their hand that is virtually impossible to not lean the shaft forward. Does that make sense to everybody? I need at least one or two nods, right? So John, give me 1 second. Let me finish the thought. I'm coming right to you. So doesn't mean they can't hit good shots. It just means that by the design of the club that you've put in their hand, you are sort of forcing them into that corner. And therefore, they're going to have to use that wedge in different ways to hit different trajectories. The other side to that coin is if someone is a forward leaner, you can put a club in their hand that might be more challenging for them to hit in that forward lean position, but allows you to train them to not lean it or deliver it so much forward at impact, because the less they lean it forward, the better the wedge will perform over top of the ground. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. John, what you got?
There we go. Wrong button. Hey, thanks, man. Appreciate your time.
You got it.
Okay. I wanted to know, well, one, so every time I would go and chip and pitch with my golfers, all last year, I only took out the L grind wedge with the 4 degrees of bounce. Okay. That was specifically as a constraint toward my own technique to make me have to do my technique better.
Right.
But could you describe, I think for everyone's clarity, if I have a lot of forward shaft lean, I would want more sole relief, more bounce.
Right.
Okay. Can you describe why that is true, considering that there are other ways to get the circle of the swing out of the ground, please?
No doubt. And so interesting you bring up the L wedge with Vokey, because the measured bounce on that wedge is off the charts, right? Even though it's got a 4 stamped on it, right? And it's that way because when you open the face and play it off the heel, it's got very little bounce, right? And so it's a pretty versatile wedge. But played from a square face position, that wedge, if you flipped it over and sort of looked down the sole, it's got a lot of angle on it, right? It's got a big ramp on it, kind of right behind the leading edge. And I love the comment, by the way, about you understanding that that's what you need to sort of work on what you need to work on. And that's kind of what I'm talking about, right? Once you understand that, then you can really put tools in your hand. It's almost a training aid, right? To help you learn how to hit the shot or move the way you want to learn how to move. And so anyway, you're right. Lots of people get the club and get the wedge out of the ground in different ways. And sometimes, depending on the conditions that they play in on a regular basis, I'll use my own club as an example. We came out of this huge renovation. We reopened the golf course in January 1 of 21. And we are super tight and firm around the greens and on the approaches, like rock hard and rock firm and tight. We mow our approaches at less than 1/4 of an inch. Okay. So really tight, but our bunkers are like the sand between the edge of the beach steps and the surf. It's like 8 inches deep and powder. Okay. And so those two wedges meaning the wedge that would work best off the tight, firm stuff and a wedge that would work best out of the bunkers don't jive, right? It's not the same wedge. And so sometimes when your conditions are such that you need some bounce out of one condition and little less bounce out of the other, then as a coach, I might use some of the things that you're talking about, meaning other ways to get the club out of the ground or other techniques to shallow the club that allow me or allow the student to use bounce in a different way. Let me explain that a little bit more. If I have a high bounce wedge, or I have a sole shape that has a lot of material on the trailing edge, then that club has to be delivered in a forward position. There's especially out of a tight lie, right? So that kills my loft. Okay. So how do I add loft to it? Well, now I might talk about some of the things that I think you have in mind, John, or that Stan Utley's talking about, left hip rise or shoulder coming up or body rising up. And that shallows the bottom of the arc and allows me to add a little bit of loft to a club that's got to be delivered in a forward position. Right. And so it might allow me to keep a tool in my student's bag that is pretty useful out of our deep, fluffy bunkers, but might be less useful off a tight lie. And it at least gives them a way to add as much loft as they can when they hit the shot off the tight lie. That gets tough for an average handicap, right? Because most of the time you're trying to just get them to move one way, much less trying to manipulate it at will, when they have a certain situation or when they're faced with a certain condition. But I will use that approach when I'm trying to get people to mix, bounces and grinds, because we have very different conditions on our golf course. Some people don't have that, right? Some people are soft all the way around. Your fairways are soft, your approaches are soft, your rough is soft, your bunkers are soft. Then you can sort of hedge toward a little bit more bounce in those situations, because you can do some things to add loft to it because of the softness and forgiveness. When you get off the firm stuff, your options become more and more limited, and you have to manipulate the club more in order to achieve some of those things. And the more you have to manipulate it, the harder it gets. And so that becomes more challenging for a higher handicap or even a mid-level handicap to learn. I'm not sure if I answered your question, John, but I tried really hard.
No, that's good, Brandon. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we had a couple of hands go up there. Jeffrey, is there a list? Because
Dave Zamero is up.
Okay, because it pops up and then it goes away on mine, and sometimes I lose track. So
yeah, we got you.
Thank you, guys. Brandon, thank you. This is great stuff, man. Thank you for your time. My apologies. I'm dropping all my kids off here. So my question is, what is your ratio when you're fitting to like pigeonholing someone into say like a 14K to like, well, here's kind of an S grind with the hopes of let's learn some more versatile shots. Just want to get your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question, right? And I don't know that I could give you the ratio, but here's how I would answer it. It is 100% student specific, right? And so if I have a student come to me who I know or they're committed to practicing and they're committed to putting the effort in to really improve their motion, then I'm much more likely, or I'm much more okay with putting a club in their hand that might not be best for them now, but I know is going to work better for them as they improve their motion. I'm less likely to do that with somebody that is going to Pebble Beach next week and they just need to learn how to chip better because it's their one trip of the year, right? Person's probably not going to work real hard at it. There's probably not going to change their technique at all. And so I'm a little bit more likely to put a club in their hand or recommend a club in their hand that will work better with the way they deliver it more often. And then just try to warn them that, hey, there are certain shots that at this stage in your skill level, you're probably just not going to be able to hit very well with your K grind, right? You short side yourself off a tight lie. K grind is going to be really tough club to be able to deliver a high and soft shot to get it close to that hole. Like, it's not impossible, but it's really, really hard. And so you just got to know that if you find yourself in that situation, just hit it to 20 feet, try to 2-putt and get out of there. But so it's totally student specific. Depends on where they are in their skill level when they come to me, and where they are in their chain of development, if you will, and whether they're, interested in learning and keeping going and pushing, or if they're just a kind of a one and done, or they just want a little bit of a tip. So,
Eric Handley.
Thank you. And thank you, Brandon, for all this. Really interesting. What series of shots do you have your golfers hit when you go through a wedge fitting?
Well, that's a good question. And so some of that is depending on the student and the skill level they bring and the current tools that they use, right? So if a student comes to me and they've got really super high bounce and really full relief on all their wedges just because that's what they've heard or what they've always played or whatever, then I might spend a little bit more time hitting some of the shorter, tighter, have to be softer, higher kind of shots, because I want them to see the advantages or disadvantages of hitting that shot with a different style of wedge. But usually I try to spread it around, right? I try to hit some tight lies where you hit it high. I try to hit some tight lies where you have to hit it low. I try to use a lot of bunker shots. The rough doesn't really matter a whole lot, frankly. It matters a little, but I don't tend to go there as much. I tend to work more off the tight lies and more off the bunkers. And I try really hard to get in a bunker that's very representative of that beach sand that we have in the rest of our bunkers, because I need them to understand, the difference in a club that has very little bounce or a lot of sole relief, and how that changes how a bunker shot has to be played relative to a sole that has a lot of bounce or a big full grind, and what that does in a bunker too. And so usually tight lies, both high and soft, and then in a bunker is where I'll spend most of my time fitting.
Thank you.
Nick Iacona.
One more question for you, because we talk about, in the Northeast, you get a mixed bag. You get very firm conditions on a lot of nice golf courses, but in the very tight lies, which really don't pose the biggest problem because the firmness of that shot, it's really doesn't seem to be the toughest thing. But, my golf club, the lie is really tight, but it's also very soft, very sandy. And you don't really see that too much with bent grass, I guess, my experience, very, very tight, but super, super soft. With your, we'll say, better players or just players in general, do you side from, using the tight lie to your advantage and incur more spin? If you have to hit the high soft shot, is it more, club change to deal with the conditions? How do you kind of approach that in those specific conditions?
All right. I'm going to ask you to reword your question because I'm not sure I understand. So try that one more time.
So, when you deal with analyzing the lie, because that's part of what kind of club you're going to take. Obviously, if it's a bump and run shot on a soft lie, it's really not that big of a deal. But say you have to carry something inside that 30-yard range and the lie is very soft, but it's super tight. How would you approach? Obviously, it's depending on the player. Put it to 30 feet, 2-putt, whatever it is. But, is there a way you explain to golfers how you deal with soft and tight conditions versus, say, a firmer condition?
Here's how I would answer that. If your technique is where it needs to be on finesse wedges, then I don't think it matters a whole lot. I'm not saying that it does matter, but the way you play the shot, I don't think changes very much. One's just a little more challenging, or I should say less forgiving than the other condition, right? And so if your technique is where it needs to be, in my opinion, some other short game coaches might disagree with this, but the club's going to work on top of the turf. It's really not going to work into the turf very much, right? And if it's working on top of the turf, it doesn't really matter too much whether it's soft or firm under it, right? Mm-hmm. The softer stuff is a little less forgiving because the club will stick. The firmer stuff's a little bit more forgiving because the club will skid. So if you hit a quarter of an inch further back than you wanted to, right, off the soft stuff, then the club might dig and you might end up hitting that shot a little fat. If the turf is really firm, then you might get away with the club sort of skidding a little and not getting into the dirt, and you might save the shot. The reverse of that could be true too. If you get too far behind it, it could bounce off the firm stuff and into the middle of the ball, and you hit it 40 yards when you were trying to hit it 10. So that could be a problem too. But I think if your technique is where it needs to be, you're working on top of the turf, and it really doesn't change how I would teach that shot.
Great. No, that's the consensus. What I hear a lot, you know, if your technique is good, and you're controlling your circle enough that the shot's going to come out well. You know, you just hear a lot of different things about how to deal with the condition depending on the shot that you have. I guess more or less you're saying if your technique is not that great and you're in this tougher condition, you're going to get exposed a little bit more.
Yeah, that's correct. And so the way I usually say that to some, you know, to a lot of folks is you have to understand what your limitations are, right? And some shots are going to be super hard for you, and some are going to, and not forgiving. And some shots are going to be a little bit more easy and a little bit more forgiving. And usually what I tell people is when I have them out, this is why I like to do most of my short game stuff out on the golf course. I usually say to them, if you're standing over this shot and you don't have complete confidence that you have the skill to hit this, or you're worried at all, you need to change something until you're not worried. Okay, here's what I mean by that. If you're short-sighted and you've got this lob wedge in your hand and you're getting ready to lay the face open and you're getting ready to try to slide it under, you know, or whatever you do, and you're worried about that, don't hit that shot. Like, it's just not gonna, the chances of you being able to pull that off were slim before, and if you've got some fear, they're probably slim to none now, right? So change something. Would you rather, or would you be more comfortable with a 56-degree wedge with a square face, just knowing you're going to hit it 20 feet past the hole? Does that bring your comfort level to the place where you're like, okay, I think I can hit this shot? If so, do that, right? Because your worst effort committed is usually better than your best effort non-committed, right? And I'll even go one step further. If you're standing there and the 56 doesn't even bring you comfort, if I put a putter in your hand from 30 yards away, would you be comfortable being able to execute that shot? And if that's what it takes when you're out playing, then that's what you need to do. And then I always challenge them. Your challenge is to go practice the other shots until you are comfortable with those in those situations. Right. That's usually kind of how I word that to folks. But certainly your technique and your skill level will keep you from being able to hit certain shots depending on where you are on that spectrum of skill. You just got to know what those shots are. And I think it's our job as a coach to make sure our students understand their limitations and understand how to work to change their limitations. If that makes sense.
Oh, that's great. Thanks so much.
Hey folks, we're about at time. We're right about 9:30. So I guess, Brandon, do you have any other, closing thoughts on any of your topics this morning? And then I guess any other follow-up questions anybody might have for Brandon, so we can let him get to his round of golf today. So
yeah, look, I would rather answer a question if someone has it. If not, I'll say a couple things to close. But sort of last call. Anybody got anything they want to hear? All right. So look, here's what I would tell you guys. If you haven't done a lot of reading or haven't done a lot of research or haven't watched enough people teach in short game, I would tell you to do it. And that's not revolutionary, right? But there are lots of ways to skin the cat in short game, just like there are in full swing. But here's what I will tell you. There aren't a lot of people that teach it and talk about it. And so there is a tremendous opportunity for, I think, everybody that's on this call as a coach to really make a huge benefit in their students' games if you find a way to improve your skill level at teaching short game, because they're not getting the information anywhere else. Despite the fact that there are a lot more people talking about it now than there were 10 or 12 years ago when I started trying to look at it, our golfers aren't getting that. The information that's out there and accessible to them, whether it's magazines or YouTube or TV, is still 90+% weighted toward full swing. So you have an incredible opportunity to be able to improve your skill set that will have a tremendous impact on their skill set if you'll just do a little bit of work to get yourself better. And there are lots of ways out there that you can do that, just like I did it many years ago. Now we have lots more people that are talking about it. And so I would end by encouraging everybody, if you have an interest in it, there's an opportunity there. Go dig it out of the dirt.
Great. Thanks so much, buddy. Really appreciate it. Thanks for jumping in late here, but that was awesome today. So can't thank you enough for your time.
Yeah, look, anybody that's got questions, I think I just saw you stick the website up there. My email's really easy. It's just stooksburygolf@gmail.com. I'm happy to get on a phone. I'm happy to, text. I'm happy to, video chat, whatever. If anybody's got any questions or needs anything, my door's always open. Look, I learned this from somebody. I want somebody to learn it from me, and I hope we all say that, and I hope we all have that attitude in this game. We should all share, because our job should be getting our students better, and there's plenty enough to go around. So please don't hesitate. If you have questions, just reach out.
Great. Thanks, Brandon. Thanks, man. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate the time again. We'll send out a little survey to everybody, what y'all thought of the day, and if there's any other topics that we want to try to cover here over the next few. And Brandon, if you want to hook up offline, I can talk a little bit how we got this started, and all good ideas. We stole from somewhere, so I think I stole this from Higgins in New England. So I think we're on the right track. Yeah, I know.
I don't want it. No,
I know. I didn't want to say his name out loud, but I had to. So, but no, I appreciate it, buddy.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. The hour went super fast. Thank you. We didn't even get to putting, right?
I know, right? We'll have to follow up. With putting.
There you go.
For sure. All right. Thanks everybody.
Have a good day.